Sometimes a single letter can change a life forever. He thought he had inherited nothing more than an empty ranch. But what waited for him there was far more dangerous and unforgettable. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. The first crack of sound rolled across the frozen valley like a cannon shot, and the echo came back from the hills as though the land itself was warning him. Daniel Keller tightened his grip on the reins, his mare snorting white plumes of breath into the biting wind. For a heartbeat, he thought it might have been thunder, but the sky was too pale, too still, too heavy with snow to promise a storm like that. No, it had been a rifle, or something close enough to carry danger in its bones. He dug his heels lightly into the horse's flank, and she surged forward, hooves drumming over the hard earth. Daniel had not set eyes on his late father's ranch in years, not since their last argument ended with words bitter enough to leave scars. The deed folded inside his saddlebag told him that the land was his now. Every splintered board, every broken fence post, every ghost that refused to leave. And yet, as he rode closer, his chest tightened with unease, as if the soil itself remembered grudges. The homestead came into view suddenly, the roofs hunched against the pale sky. Smoke should have risen in a thin column from the chimney, a sign of life and warmth. Instead, a wagon stood crooked in the yard, its wheel shattered clean through. Horses reared in panic, their cries piercing the cold air. Against them, a young woman struggled desperately, her hair whipped by the wind, her thin coat no protection against the storm creeping in. Daniel's instincts took over. He swung down from his saddle before the mare had fully stopped. The animals fought him, muscles rippling under their hides, eyes wide with wild terror. He seized the bit, braced his boots in the churned mud, and pulled until his arms trembled. A sharp command cut through the chaos. "Loosen the lines," he barked without glancing back. Someone obeyed, and the horses stilled enough for him to guide them against the barn wall. Their snorts fogged the air, but the danger ebbed like a wave drawing back from shore. When Daniel turned, he froze. A half circle of women stood in the yard, skirts whipping around their legs, eyes sharp, frightened, and yet filled with something else: expectation. 7 of them, none he had ever seen before. Their clothes marked them from different places, different lives. A tall, auburn-haired woman stood rigid with her arms crossed, a streak of soot on her cheek. A blonde clutched a worn Bible tight to her chest, as though it were a shield. Another, pale and dark-eyed, wore a man's coat too large for her frame. Behind them, younger faces peeked from the porch, all strangers, all watching him with the same question burning in their gaze. "You're Daniel Keller," the blonde said finally, her breath steaming. Daniel did not answer. His pulse hammered too loudly in his ears, and the cold cut into him like a knife. "We had letters," the auburn-haired one pressed, her voice carrying both defiance and challenge. "Letters with your name. Promises of marriage. Promises of this ranch." The words struck him harder than the rifle crack had. He looked at them, 7 women stranded here, claiming ties to him he had never made. His jaw clenched as he exhaled. "That's so," he muttered, flat and grim as the winter ground. Before he could ask more, a gust of wind slammed into them, hurling sleet and snow sideways across the yard. The youngest of the women cried out, clutching her shawl. Daniel lifted a hand for silence. "Storm's coming," he said. "Inside, all of you." The women obeyed without argument, filing into the parlor like shadows. Inside, the heat of the fire struck him, mingling with the scent of damp wool and wood smoke. Shawls hung dripping over chair backs, skirts steamed in the glow of the hearth. Daniel stood for a long moment, the storm's howl pressing against the walls, before hanging his slicker on a peg. "Where's my father's men?" he asked, his voice low but edged with suspicion. "The foreman? Neighbors? Anybody?" The blonde shook her head. "No one since we arrived. Weeks now." Daniel's gut twisted. A ranch like this didn't run itself. And these women, whatever they were here for, were no ranch hands. His gaze drifted across the room and halted. The dark-haired woman in the man's coat had slipped toward a corner. Kneeling, she lifted the lid of a trunk, just enough to peer inside. When she noticed him watching, Her eyes flickered with something raw, a mix of defiance and readiness, as though she could vanish into the storm at the first chance. The shutters banged in the wind. Daniel turned toward the kitchen, poured coffee into a pot, and set it on the stove. When he handed out mugs, he saved hers for last. Her fingers brushed his, calloused and cold, not the hands of a lady brought up in comfort. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Anna. Where you from, Anna?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Nowhere that matters." The other women leaned closer, listening. Daniel said nothing more. But inside, the knot in his gut tightened. He knew the storm outside was not the only one he would have to face. And somewhere in the distance, so faint it might have been, imagine the sound of a single hoofbeat cracked the silence. The storm raged through the night, hammering the shutters and rattling the eaves as though the house itself might be torn apart. Daniel lay awake in his father's old room, staring at the ceiling beams. The deed sat folded on the table, its ink a stark reminder that this place belonged to him now. But ownership and safety were not the same. Downstairs, 7 strangers slept uneasily under his roof, each one brought here by promises Daniel had never made. And beyond the storm walls, he knew something or someone was waiting. At dawn, gray light seeped through the frost-laced windows. Daniel pulled on his coat and went down. The kitchen smelled of weak coffee and damp wool. The women had risen early, restless. Some clutched shawls around their shoulders. Others whispered in corners, eyes darting toward him as though he held the answer to a question none dared to voice. But the one face he saw Tana's was missing. Before he could ask, the back door creaked. She stepped in with an armload of firewood, her cheeks flushed from cold, her dark hair tangled by the wind. She set the wood down by the hearth, brushed her hands clean, and crossed the room without looking at anyone. Daniel's gaze followed her despite himself. "You were out before sunrise," he said quietly. "Fire was low," she replied simply, then broke a piece of cornbread without meeting his eyes. The exchange, small as it was, drew attention. The blonde with the Bible frowned, the auburn-haired woman smirked, and one of the younger girls bit her lip nervously. Rivalries and alliances were forming, silent but sharp. Daniel could feel it like static in the air. By midday, the storm had eased enough for him to check the barn. The roof sagged under ice, beams groaning. He fetched a ladder, nails clinking in his pocket. Halfway up, he sensed someone behind him. Anna stood there, holding a tin of nails. "You missed one," she said, nodding toward the beam above him. He allowed himself a short breath of surprise. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said simply, her breath misting in the cold. Her steadiness unsettled him. She wasn't afraid, not like the others. She was watching everything, calculating. He wondered who she had been before the ranch, before the letters. That night, the kitchen fell quiet after a thin supper of beans and salted meat. The auburn-haired woman broke the silence, her tone sharp as a knife. "If you're going to choose one of us, Keller, you'd better do it soon. We're not here to play house with each other." Daniel met her stare evenly, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "Nobody's choosing anything tonight." From the corner, Anna's voice came low, quiet, but carrying. "Maybe not ever." The auburn-haired woman's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. The fire popped in the silence. Daniel found himself wanting to ask Anna what she meant, but the question lodged in his throat. Later, as he climbed the stairs, he caught the faint creak of a floorboard behind him. Anna stood in the hall, a folded coat draped over her arm. "It was hanging by the back door," she said. "I mended the tear. Figured you'd want it before you ride again." He took it, his fingers brushing the rough patch she had stitched. "It's warmer if you double the thread," she added, almost shyly. Before leaving, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the rooms where the others slept. "You've got eyes on you all the time, Keller. Be careful what you believe." Her words lingered long after she left. Daniel stood with the coat in his hands, the storm still howling outside. Then faint, deliberate, a sound drifted in from the night. A single hoofbeat on frozen ground. He crossed to the window. The yard was blanketed in unbroken snow. Nothing moved, but he knew what he had heard. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. And whatever brought those 7 women here, it was only the beginning. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving the valley locked in a silence so heavy that every creak of the house sounded like a gunshot. The snow lay deep against the barn walls, high enough to swallow a man's knees. The air outside was brittle, the kind of cold that burned the lungs. Daniel stepped into the yard, boots crunching over crusted drifts, scanning the ridges. The world looked clean, white, untouched. But he knew better. Somewhere beyond the tree line, someone had been watching. When he came back inside, the kitchen was restless. The women were scattered like a herd pinned too close together. The blonde sat straight-backed by the stove, lips moving in silent scripture. The auburn-haired woman lounged in a chair with arms folded, eyes locked on him as though she were testing every word he hadn't yet spoken. The youngest, barely more than a girl, fidgeted with the cuff of her sleeve until it unraveled. And Anna was absent again. Her absence gnawed at him until the back door creaked and she stepped in, arms full of kindling, snow still clinging to her hair. She dropped the wood by the stove without speaking, brushed her palms clean, and sat at the table as though nothing had happened. Daniel caught himself watching her too long. "You're up earlier than the rest," he said. Her shoulders lifted slightly. "Fire won't wait for prayers." The blonde stiffened, glaring at her. The auburn-haired woman's lips twisted into a smirk. Anna ignored them both, breaking cornbread in silence. Daniel let the moment pass, but the tension hung in the room like smoke. By midday, he was patching the barn roof. The hammer rose and fell in a steady rhythm, each strike echoing through the valley. Halfway through driving a nail, Anna appeared again, standing at the ladder's base with a small tin of nails. "You missed one," she said, nodding toward the beam. He studied her for a moment. "You know tools." "My father kept a workshop," she answered. Her voice faltered, then hardened. Before he drank it away. It was the first real thing she had told him. He nodded once, filing it away, then returned to work. That evening, the women gathered around the fire, their faces pale in the flickering light. Daniel split kindling at the hearth, the sharp scent of pine bleeding into the room. Anna stacked the wood without being asked, her hands steady, her movements sure. No words passed between them, yet each piece she set down felt like something spoken. Then, without warning, the auburn-haired woman broke the silence. "If you think we're just going to sit here waiting, Keller, you're wrong. You'll have to choose sooner or later." Daniel turned, meeting her glare with one of his own. "Nobody's choosing anything tonight." From the shadows, Anna's voice cut low. "Maybe not ever." The auburn-haired woman's face tightened, but she didn't push further. Still, the air in the room grew sharp as broken glass. Hours later, long after the others had drifted upstairs, Daniel found Anna alone by the fire, mending a tear in one of the old coats. The lamplight painted her hair bronze, her hands moving with quiet precision. "You said something earlier," he began, "about not choosing." Her eyes stayed on the fabric. "Men like your father, and men like the one who sent those letters, they think women are pieces to trade, promises to collect. Maybe you're different. But if you're not..." She let the thought hang in the air, sharper than any blade. Before he could answer, a sound cut through the quiet, a low, deliberate tapping against the wall. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Daniel rose instantly, crossing to the window. He pulled it open a crack, icy air slapping his face. Nothing but darkness. Nothing but snow sliding from the eaves. Then he saw them. Fresh boot prints pressed deep into the drift, leading away toward the trees. He closed the window slowly, his pulse thundering in his ears. When he turned, Anna was watching him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was already written in her eyes. Whoever was out there, they weren't just watching. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. And it was only a matter of time before the storm inside the house would be just as dangerous as the one outside. The house grew restless as night pressed close, the storm's silence replaced by a tension thick enough to choke on. Every creak of the floorboards seemed louder, every gust of wind against the shutters sharper. Daniel sat at the table with a rifle laid across his lap, oil rag in hand. The barrel gleamed faintly in the lamplight as he cleaned it, each pass of the cloth steady and deliberate. His father's tack room had held rifles, but most were rusted, their stocks warped. He had chosen the best of a bad lot, and he prayed it would be enough. The women clustered in the parlor, their voices hushed but edged with unease. Daniel could hear them from the kitchen, whispers of fear, whispers of doubt, and under it all, the constant question of what his role would be. Savior or trap? Husband or jailer? He let them talk. He had spent enough years on the trail to know that a group left to itself would show its cracks faster than if you pressed it. When Anna entered, The room shifted without a word. She carried a stack of kindling, her cheeks red from cold, strands of hair loose around her face. She placed the wood by the hearth, then glanced toward him. Their eyes met for a moment, hers steady, unreadable, but carrying something that made his gut twist tighter. She moved past him to sit by the fire, pulling a needle and thread from her pocket. As the others whispered, she sewed in silence. Daniel rose, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. "Lanterns," he said. "I'll post them along the porch rail. Whoever's out there needs to know we're not blind." The auburn-haired woman scoffed. "You think a few lanterns will stop them?" "No," he said flatly. "But it might make them think twice." He stepped out into the yard, the cold biting so hard it felt alive. He lit each lantern, their glow casting weak circles into the snow. The storm had calmed, but the valley held an eerie stillness, as if waiting. Beyond the fence, the tree line stood like a black wall. He could feel eyes on him, though he saw nothing. Back inside, the heat struck him, but so did the tension. The blonde clutched her Bible, murmuring verses. The younger girl sat rigid, her hands trembling as she tried to thread a needle. Anna looked up as he entered, her gaze steady, unflinching. She knew. He didn't have to speak it aloud. And then it came the faintest sound, soft but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the far wall. The women gasped, some clutching at each other. Daniel moved to the window, threw it open. The cold punched in, carrying silence so heavy it hurt. At first, nothing. Then his eyes caught it. Boot prints, pressed fresh into the drift, leading away toward the trees. He shut the window slowly, turning back. His face must have told them everything, because no one asked. The blonde whispered a prayer. The auburn-haired woman cursed under her breath. And Anna just watched him, her expression unreadable, though in her eyes was the knowledge of someone who had already lived through worse. That night, after the others drifted off to their rooms, Daniel found her stacking kindling in the kitchen. The lamplight caught her cheek, turning it gold. "They're not just watching," he said quietly. "They've been at the house." Her hands stilled over the woodpile. "Then the storm's the only thing keeping them out." Daniel thought of the ridge, the tapping, the hoofbeat in the dark. He thought of his father's last letter unfinished, filled with talk of debts without names. His gut twisted. "Anna," he said slowly, "if you know who's out there, dash." She cut him off, her voice low but certain. "I know enough to say they won't stop. And if one of the women brought them here." Her eyes lifted to his. "It's not the one you think." Before he could press her, a sound split the air. Not a knock this time. A shot. It cracked through the valley like thunder, rattling the glass in the windows. The women screamed, scattering from the parlor into the hall. Daniel lunged for the door, rifle in hand, boots pounding against the floorboards. Another shot came, splinters flying from the barn siding as he slammed the door shut behind him. Smoke. He could smell it, faint but growing. He turned and saw it, flames licking along the edge of the barn roof, small but hungry, driven by the gusts. The horses screamed inside, thrashing against their stalls. A voice bellowed from the yard, harsh and cutting. "Send her out, Keller, and we'll leave the rest." Daniel froze, the rifle steady in his hands, his breath white against the night air. The words sliced through him sharper than any bullet. Send her out. And he knew, without needing to ask, exactly which woman they meant. The barn fire roared, flames clawing at the timber like beasts desperate to devour. Daniel dashed forward, snow crunching under his boots as heat washed over him. The smell of burning hay filled the air, acrid and suffocating. He pulled the barn door closed, bracing his shoulder against it while the terrified horses inside pounded their hooves against the stalls. "Send her out, Keller." The voice came again, cutting through the chaos. It carried a smug certainty, like men who believe the night belonged to them. "Give us the dark-haired one, and we'll spare the rest." Daniel's blood went cold. Anna. It was her they wanted. He turned, rifle raised, and stepped into the open yard. Two riders circled slowly, their horses stamping and snorting clouds into the frigid air. Both wore long coats crusted with frost, wide hats pulled low to shadow their faces. Their movements were deliberate, like predators savoring the hunt. Behind Daniel, the ranch house door slammed open. The women spilled onto the porch, their faces pale in the firelight. Shawls clutched, eyes wide, each one silently counting the odds, 2 armed men outside, one rifle in Daniel's hands, and the barn burning hotter by the second. Anna was not among them. Daniel planted his boots in the snow, squaring his shoulders. "You've got no claim here," he shouted. One rider laughed, short and cruel. "We've got letters, Keller. Letters with your name. And they say different." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then come and take them." The riders nudged their horses closer, hooves crunching over ice. One aimed his rifle lazily toward the porch. Daniel shifted, raising his own barrel, ready to meet fire with fire. Then movement caught his eye. From the far edge of the yard, a figure emerged from the tree line. Anna. She was bareheaded, hair whipped by the wind, cheeks flushed from the cold. In one hand, she led Daniel's spare gelding. In the other, she clutched a bundle wrapped in rawhide. "Stay back," Daniel barked, but she kept walking, her pace steady, unyielding. The riders tensed, one shifting in the saddle as though to cut her off. Daniel stepped forward, rifle aimed squarely. "Stay in your saddle," he growled. Anna reached him, thrusting the bundle into his coat. Her breath came fast, fogging the air. "From their saddlebags," she whispered. "Letters. Contracts. Proof they lied. Proof they took the rest." Daniel shoved the bundle deep inside his coat. The riders cursed, spurring their horses closer. "You don't walk away from this, Keller," one snarled. Daniel's reply was calm, cold. "Then ride in and find out." The wind shifted hard, dragging the storm down from the ridge. Snow thickened suddenly, blinding, swirling like a curtain between predator and prey. The horses balked, shying against the reins. Daniel moved with the storm, stepping into its cover. Each stride sank deep into the snow, but it carried him closer. The nearest rider turned too late. Daniel slammed his shoulder into the man's leg, knocking him clean out of the saddle. The rider crashed into the drift, breath whooshing out in a grunt. Daniel ripped the rifle from his hands and tossed it into the snow. The second rider wheeled his horse, but the animal panicked at a sudden gust, rearing high. Daniel fired into the air, the crack rolling across the valley like thunder. The horse bolted downslope, its rider clinging desperately before vanishing into the storm. By the time the wind eased, the yard was empty save for churned snow and the smell of burned hay. The barn roof glowed with embers, threatening to collapse. Daniel dropped to his knees, shoving open the door. "Buckets," he roared. The women scrambled, forming a line from the pump to the barn. Anna was already there, her hands red from cold as she hauled water with a strength that belied her frame. They fought together, smoke choking their throats, eyes stinging as flames hissed and spat. When the last bucket doused the final ember, silence fell heavy over the ruin. Daniel leaned against the stall door, chest heaving, soot streaking his face. Anna stood beside him, wiping ash from her cheek. Her eyes met his, unwavering. "Now you know," she said, nodding toward the bundle still tucked inside his coat. He swallowed, the weight of it pressing heavier than iron. Around them, the other women stood in a loose half-circle coughing, clutching buckets, eyes wide with shock and something else, fear of what would come next. Daniel straightened, scanning the ridge. The storm was thickening again, shadows blurring into white. "They'll come back," he said grimly. Anna's hand brushed his sleeve, not a plea, not a promise, but something steady, anchoring. "Yes," she whispered. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." Morning came gray and heavy, the storm leaving the valley buried under silence. The barn still smoked faintly, its charred beams standing like blackened ribs against the snow. Daniel walked the fence line, boots crunching, rifle slung over his shoulder. His every step reminded him. The riders had been driven off, but not defeated. Men like that didn't vanish. They regrouped, circled back, struck again when the ground softened beneath your guard. Inside the house, the women moved with quiet determination. Some mended clothes, some tended to the animals that had survived the fire. Yet their glances carried weight, questions unspoken, fears that clung like shadows. Daniel knew they were waiting for him to decide whether this place would be a fortress or a grave. Anna was at the pump when he returned, sleeves rolled, water splashing against the bucket. She worked with the calm of someone who had long ago accepted hard labor as survival. Her eyes lifted briefly to his before returning to the task. There was no need for words. Her presence steadied him more than any sermon or promise could. By midday, he gathered the women in the kitchen. The bundle of letters lay on the table, the rawhide cord loosened to reveal its ugly truth. Pages of promises forged in his name, contracts luring desperate women into traps they could not escape. Some of the women looked away, ashamed of their hope. Others stared in quiet fury, the betrayal cutting deeper than the cold. "You've all been used," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "My father's ranch was part of it. His debts, his silence, maybe worse. But you're not prisoners here. Anyone who wants to leave will have supplies, coin, and a safe road to the next town. No one stays without choosing." The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Slowly, one of the younger women nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. Another followed, relief in her eyes. A few others said nothing, their faces set with a kind of stubborn courage. For the first time, choice was theirs. That night, after the others had gone to their rooms, Daniel found Anna by the hearth again. She was mending the same coat she had patched on the first night, the needle flashing in and out of the fabric. He watched her work for a long moment before crouching beside her. "You still mean to leave when the snow clears?" he asked. Her hands paused. "That was the plan. You've had other plans before." His voice was softer now, and they didn't work out. She lifted her gaze to his, the firelight catching the steel in her eyes. "And what are you asking, Keller?" "That maybe this time you make one that does." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not unwelcome. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away either. And that was enough. The thaw came in sudden bursts, warm days that sent the creek spilling over its banks, cold nights that froze it again by dawn. The barn was repaired in pieces, each board nailed with care, the blackened beams left standing as a reminder. The women who chose to leave departed with full satchels, Daniel watching until their figures vanished down the trail. The rest stayed, sleeves rolled, skirts pinned, hands raw from rope and shovel. One afternoon, Anna came to him by the fence with a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its pages filled with careful script. The letters, copied by her own hand. "So there's a record," she said. "Proof of what happened here, in case someone asks." Daniel held the book a moment longer than necessary, its weight more than paper and ink. "You trust me with this?" Her faint smile reached her eyes. "You've earned that much." That evening, as the others slept, Daniel and Anna walked to the corral. The stars shone bright, the air cool with the smell of thawing grass. She leaned against the fence, gazing at the pasture. "When I came here," she said, voice low, "I was just trying to survive the winter. Now, maybe I could live through the spring." He stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing not just in space, but in the weight of everything they had endured. "Then stay, not because of the letters, or the others, or the storm. Stay because you want to." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Small, but certain. Inside the house, the deed to the ranch lay on the mantel beside the leather book. One told of what had been stolen, the other of what might be built. The fire burned low, the shutters rattled in the night wind, but the sound was smaller now, no longer a threat, just part of the land they had claimed together. Daniel reached for Anna's hand. Her grip was warm, strong, calloused like his own. The simple weight of it anchored him more than any promise ever could. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But this time, they won't find me alone." And for the first time since setting foot on the ranch, Daniel Keller believed it. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.